The following program is made possible by a grant from the Ohio State Department of Education.
Well, that does it. I packed everything I own in the world, and now I'm getting out of this town.
Well, where do you plan to go?
Well, that's hard to say. But believe me, it'll be a long way from here. Might head down south. You know, it's warm down there. The sun shines every day. And when you're planting seeds in a field, why, you know, by the time you get to the end of the row, the seeds at the beginning have already popped out of the ground.
Well, that sounds remarkable. What do they call this land?
Call it Louisiana country.
Louisiana? Well, doesn't that land belong to France?
Yes, but I can parlez-vous français.
Oh.
And believe me, after that trick Eb Stewart played on me, there's not room enough for Eb and me in the same town. So, farewell, stranger.
Well, goodbye, son, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Oh, they had a variety of different reasons. An unhappy love affair, a misunderstanding with a friend, or just for the sheer adventure of it. But whatever the reasons, many young men left the settled towns of the East. Some journeyed to the West. Others veered off to the South, with its rich soil and its warm climate, and its highways of rivers branching off from the mighty Mississippi.
Au clair de la lune, mon ami Perrault, prêtez-moi ta plume pour écrire mon...
This then was the land of Louisiana, a rich, fertile land, crisscrossed with rivers and bayous owned by the King of France. In this lush, warm climate, new settlers found a long growing season, plenty of gentle rain, and the red earth. The fertile, rich red earth, in which almost anything would flourish and grow. Along the river pathways, they used the earth to make the bricks to build their homes. Homes that were half hidden by the thick growth and sweet blossoms of azalea, magnolia. The houses were French colonial in style, with a gallery or porch across the front where a family could sit to enjoy the summer breeze. For a Louisiana summer was hot and humid. Some homes were even built on stilts to let the cooling air circulate under the floor. These early settlers were farmers, and they established big farms or plantations near the rivers for easy transportation. They raised animals for food, and almost every plantation had a pigeonniere where pigeons were raised, for pigeons were used for food too. With such fertile land available, farming was a way to become rich. But the farmer realized he needed more help, more workers, to build bigger and better farms. And he soon discovered he could make more money by using slaves, black men and women captured in Africa and forced to come to America. The planter owned the slaves. They were his property, and the slaves had to work as long and as hard as the planter demanded. The slaves were used to clear away the stumps and brush to make way for the fields of cotton, tobacco, and indigo. To plant and care for those crops. To build and paint and polish the great plantation homes. The owner provided living quarters and food for the slaves he owned, just as he would provide a barn and hay for his cattle, for they too were his property. Slave cabins were small and crowded. Usually it was more pleasant to stay outside.
You shall have all the pretty little horses.
Some slaves were put to work inside the big house. Quite often, their living quarters were attached to the big house, so they could be nearby whenever they were needed. Planters used their cheap slave labor to provide luxuries, to add to the beauty of their homes. A roadway bordered by huge live oaks often led the way to the plantation house, big house, where the owner or planter and his family lived. The yard near the house was often planted in formal gardens, where perhaps a young lady might entertain a friend. Housework was always done by slaves. Instead of learning to cook or dust, the planters' daughters, young ladies of the house, would learn how to supervise the slaves who did that kind of work in the house. Even the youngest slaves were put to work. And sometimes a slave would be born, live out his entire life and die, living always on the same plantation and belonging always to the same family. Plantations were located far apart and very rarely near a town, so when there were guests, they usually stayed for several days. A young girl was taught to be a gracious hostess and to play the piano to entertain her guests, who were treated with great hospitality. For of course, there were plenty of slaves to do the necessary work. And a young slave, dressed with suitable elegance, could stand there forever, pulling the cord of a punka to keep flies away from the beautifully set table until plantation owners and guests were ready to come and eat. When they heard the pealing of the plantation bell, the field hands knew that they could stop work, and for a short while, there would be rest and quiet and peace. For a slave in the fields worked from sun up to sundown, always for the planter, never for himself. It was good to sit, to lie, to rest for a moment in the shade of the tall grass. It was good to enjoy the company of a friend. Perhaps to weave a clover chain. Most slaves spent their lifetime in slavery, but occasionally one was set free. Such was the slave Marie-Thérèse Coquet. Her parents were slaves, and when she was born in 1742, she too was a slave, the property of Madame de Soto. After 36 years of slavery, Marie-Thérèse Coquet was set free and given a small plot of land. There she built a house, a sturdy Louisiana house, made from the materials that were close at hand. Solid cypress boards for the frame, and the walls filled in with bousillage, a plaster-like substance made from the rich red earth, mixed with moss and deer hair. Perhaps it was somewhat like the house in which she had served so long as a slave, a typical plantation house, one that would still stand almost 200 years later, after Marie-Thérèse Coquet was dead and gone. Although she was born in America, she never forgot her African heritage. She kept her African name, Coquet, and even built an African-style building. The roof was wide and low to keep off both the sun and the rain. The upper room was used as a storage place for grain. By the time she was 50, Marie-Thérèse Coquet had done the impossible. Born a black slave, she had managed to build a large, successful plantation. She had secured freedom not only for herself, but also for her 10 children. But as a plantation owner, she too owned slaves. And for punishment, those slaves might be locked inside Africa House, the building made of bricks, formed from the Louisiana earth in the style of an ancient country in Africa. Sometime after she was 75 years old, Marie-Thérèse Coquet died, leaving behind her a family that was finally free. But most slaves were not so fortunate. Most slaves always worked for another man to tend his crops and build his plantation. Southern hospitality was a tradition on the old plantations, and almost every big house had one bedroom which had an outside door. A friend or even a stranger was always welcome to use this room at any time of the day or night without telling anyone. Of course, it was called the stranger's room. Here a guest could relax, take off his boots, make himself at home, assured of a roof over his head and a comfortable bed for the night. People who lived on an isolated plantation were always pleased to entertain a guest.
No, not yet. Well, then in that case, Mama wants to see you in the sewing room. Yes, Elizabeth. And Mr. Prudham, how are things?
Occasionally, the guest might be a traveling salesman. And with him, he might have miniature samples of the hats he had for sale.
I think this one would look lovely on you, Miss Elizabeth.
Well, sir, I don't rightly know about this one. Do you have another?
Yes, certainly. We have this one in velvet and in satin.
Yes, sir, I think this is the one. I think it would look marvelous with my new dress and Mr. Prudham's ball. Yes, sir, this is it. I'll take this one.
A hat of ribbon and bows to wear in the warm summer sunshine, to wear to a party on the lawn beneath the rows of tall live oak. A fancy hat to top a pretty dress of silk and lace with an impossibly wide hoop skirt. To bedazzle a soldier wearing the gray uniform of the Confederate Army. For by 1862, almost all the young men were dressed in Confederate gray. The war between the states had begun. The cannons had fired at Fort Sumter. The Confederate Army had won the battles of Rich Mountain and Bull Run. The Southerners were certain they would also win the war.
Why, if the South should lose this war, we'd lose our whole way of life.
But that, sir, is surely impossible. Now tell me true, Lieutenant Beauregard, have you ever really seen an honest-to-goodness Yankee?
Well, no, ma'am. To tell you the truth, I don't expect I ever will, except maybe from behind, when he's running away.
I consider it a rare honor and a privilege to serve in the Army of the Confederate States of America.
Well, Maribel, I'll give you my solemn promise. This old war will be over, and I'll be home to stay by mid-July.
July. Why, then we can continue our wedding arrangements.
But it didn't work out that way. The war was long, the war was bitter. There were other battles. The tide turned against the South, and the war came close to home.
Sir, Union forces have broken through the defenses at Fort Jessup.
And one after another, the plantations were destroyed by the advancing armies of the North.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
And now all the young men marched off to war.
The old church bell
and the red bricks of the destroyed plantations would return once again to the earth, to be plowed under into the rich red earth.
The village lads and lassies say, with roses they will strew the way, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home, when Johnny comes marching home, when Johnny comes marching home.